tinnitus and its impact on the brain. A new study sheds light on this hearing disorder that is so difficult to treat. According to research, tinnitus is linked to high brain activity, from which new therapies could be extracted for treatment. Tinnitus, the unpleasant sensation of constant ringing in the ear, is a hearing disorder that affects about 1 in 5 people. Recently, a group of researchers concluded that tinnitus is linked to surprisingly extensive activity in the brain, and this may be the cause why the condition is so difficult to cure. According to the evidence, treating a 50-year-old man who suffered from tinnitus associated with hearing loss in both ears, this phenomenon causes completely different brain activity than that caused by normal external sounds. The impact of tinnitus could be observed in almost the entire auditory cortex, along with other parts of the brain. As a result of the research, experts may come up with new ways to treat this ear condition. As study co-author Will Sedley of the University of Newcastle in the UK says, "We now know that tinnitus is represented very differently in the brain than a normal sound, even a sound that sounds the same, and therefore these sounds cannot necessarily be used as a basis for understanding tinnitus or directing a treatment." Can we trick the brain to stop tinnitus? Tinnitus is the perception of a sound, for example ringing, buzzing, beeping etc., in the absence of any external stimulus. It can be constant or intermittent, fixed or pulsating. It can be perceived by one or both ears and even in the center of the head. There are patients who think that sound comes from an external source and look for its origin until they discover that the sound is in fact produced inside. It is quite common and occurs in any age group. About 30% of the population will experience tinnitus at some point in their lives. Tinnitus usually disappears, but in about 10% of cases tinnitus persists. Virtually everyone has experienced a ringing in their ears after a night at a nightclub or enjoying a concert. Perhaps you have never paid too much attention to it because that sound usually disappears on its own. But what would you have felt if the next morning you still heard that annoying ringing in your ears? What if it never stopped? Tinnitus affects approximately 10 to 15% of the world's adult population and there is currently no drug treatment available on the market. The reason is that there is still limited knowledge of how tinnitus appears and how to make it go away. The generation and transmission of signals in the brain are subject to constant change. In particular, signals can be enhanced or adjusted in a process known as plasticity. When signals are potentiated, it is known as long-term potentiation, a process that is critical to our ability to learn and store memories. Knowing that tinnitus is a phantom sound that does not exist in the outside world but is perceived suggests that somewhere in the brain there are cells that generate a false signal in response to a sound that does not exist. Studies show that auditory signals are transmitted from the cochlea in the inner ear to a brain structure called the dorsal cochlear nucleus. What triggers tinnitus? Tinnitus is more common in people with hearing loss caused by damage to the cochlea or auditory nerve. Tinnitus may be due to exposure to loud noises, instantly from an explosion or multiple experiences over a long period of time, medications that damage the auditory nerve, middle ear problems, such as infections and vascular tumors, and aging as the hearing loss gradually develops. Tinnitus may also be a symptom of Meniere's disease, a disorder of the balance mechanism in the inner ear. Some medications such as aspirin, certain antibiotics, anti-malarial drugs, anti-cancer drugs and anticonvulsants can also trigger tinnitus or worsen its perception. The experience of tinnitus may be bearable for some, and bothersome and painful for others.